Moving on, we are going into our panel session. I'm going to invite on stage to join me, of course, Paul Godfrey, who's going to moderate the session. Further than that, Naz Noor, founder and managing partner of Asil Group. I saw you, Naz. There we are. Alexander Williams, Dubai SME. You do not require an introduction. Danish Farhan. I saw you too. Aman Merchant from Impact Hub. Kim Tran, Head of Global Transaction Banking Sales from NBAD. And last but not least, Martin from QFCA. Oh, come on, audience, you all can clap. I request you to engage this audience with these people and then send them all out for coffee. I think they all need to be woken up.
Thank you very much, Gina. Thank you. Let's begin with hanging a question in the air. Is it possible for the West-East corridor to achieve a level playing field for regional business and accelerate regional business to a global performance scale? Alexander, what do you think?
Certainly. I mean, one of the key issues I always tell our SMEs when they internationalize is that they must be mindful of the different markets that they go to. Every market has a different set of rules and regulations. So, I mean, Avi mentioned that Dubai has its sets of competitive advantage. Other countries have cost advantage, quality advantage. So the different premiums that each city has is important. So when a company internationalizes, they must know that when they come to Dubai, I see Dubai, because of its non-tax economy, as a profit center. Whereas many tax economies, they are cost centers. So when you want to put your activities in different regions, if it's a cost center where you can deduct your tax for investments in R&D, for example, you can do that. So again, geographically, Dubai is a profit center. Most tax economies are cost centers, but it doesn't mean that you can't make money there. You can deduct your expenses against your investments in assets. Yeah. So think of that.
With your experience, like we've often mentioned Singapore today, you know, you are Singaporean. With your Singaporean experience, is there a factor X that businesses in the West-East corridor need to pursue in order to equal the performance of that Asian tiger mentality? Is there something we're not doing here? What do you think?
I think in the Singapore context where I grew up, the SMEs have been plugged in from day one to the global environment. So for example, Singapore is very good at attracting the investors, but when the investors come, the government or the trade and industry associations, which play a very critical part in the ecosystem, lines up the SMEs to meet the investors. So on day one, the Singapore government actively facilitates these meetings, and these, in Singapore, we always say that we don't let things happen by chance. We always manage the process. And once the investor comes, say from a drug company, we make sure that the SMEs who manages the labs, the raw materials for the laboratories are there, and they can start business immediately. So this active facilitation is done to the T.
Thank you very much, Alex. Kim, you know, something that you and I have often spoken about is the raft of bureaucratic procedures relating to many aspects of trade. You know, do you perceive that there is something that banks here in the region can do to leverage greater fluency across the markets of the West-East corridor? What do you think?
I think to your point, I think on the Singapore model, I've discussed also, I think if you look at the way company trade here, because there's a lot of trader in Dubai, and they tell me how things are done in Singapore, you see a lot of fluency in the way, you know, export-import documents have been facilitating throughout the chain. I think I've seen Dubai and, the Dubai Trade, which is the organization, you know, managing all of this, is trying to model that model where the documentation is flowing very smoothly.
Yes. Yeah.
That's actually a Singaporean model. And if you look at bankers, for us as well, seeing something more e-channel around trade documents, it's something we like because we can go even faster to finance transaction. So it started because there are a lot of projects, you know, run by Dubai Trade, but there are a lot more we can do. And this is happening at the moment.
Danish, what do you think about this? Because I've often heard you speak on like supercharging processes of this kind. What's your view on this?
Is my mic working? Okay. I think I'd like to start off by challenging the notion of the East and the West. I think we're over-glorifying this corridor. It's always existed. Dubai exists on the very fact that it leveraged this. So I don't see the point of making this such a big deal today, because there has been a big deal for 43 years. To start off with.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think the greatest challenge, I'm just going to digress a little bit, is that Dubai has the innovation bug. And a bug could be good and bad, because it leads to vaccinations and cures, but it's quite terrible when you're going through it. We need to learn how to switch off innovation as well.
Yes.
Earlier on the panel, there was a wonderful analogy between Singapore and Dubai, which is Singapore innovated, perhaps plateaued at the moment. Dubai is innovating at the moment as well. But there needs to be an off switch in order for you to scale. And the SME sector specifically needs to know when to stop, get what they're doing right, and then start scaling. That perhaps is the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best points I've heard so far today. But the gentleman sitting next to you might not agree with this, because Aman, you know, like you are one of the, dare I say, you're one of the kings of innovation, aren't you? You know, you are an active supporter of micro and burgeoning businesses with a strong innovation model. So what's your views on what Danish says?
Well, I think the notion of there being no level playing field for SMEs, I actually fundamentally disagree with that actually as a notion. The way I see it is, at the end of the day, I mean, you have this conversation about big versus small, local versus imported competition, but when you step on the football field, you still have to play the game. You can't cry by saying you can't actually, you know, you can't, it's not like the same rules. The same rules apply to you when you get there. So, for example, at Impact Hub, when we accelerate ideas and startups to SMEs, we don't talk about things being fair, unfair, big, small. We say, well, what can you do to level the playing field? And the way I would kind of, I guess, simplify that is to say that at the end of the day, it's all about what's the backstage component. When the players or the package cause the difference. So the companies themselves, the SMEs have to think about what's the backstage that they have to do. So at the front stage, the experience they bring to the table counts.
Yeah. Naz, what do you think? Like, you are the actually, forgive me for saying, you're the epitome of the West-East corridor, aren't you? That is you, isn't it? Like, what's your view on this? Is a level playing field possible? What do you think?
For me, from my point of view, being born and brought up in Dubai, it's quite exciting to see how we've evolved. And what I love about the fact in Dubai that there is no limit. There's always a yes.
Yes.
There would be a lot of problems that we tend to face often, but there is no door that you can't open and find a solution for it, which is quite remarkable. And as now we're having a discussion where we're comparing ourselves to Singapore, we're comparing ourselves to the West, but what the amazing part about being today is that we've actually crossed quite a lot of boundaries ourselves.
Yes.
We've created a country where it actually, you know, ticks all the boxes purely because we've never limited ourselves. And you can see we're constantly going and growing and growing despite of all the odds that you tend to see. So from my point of view, from where I sit today, it's quite remarkable that we're getting compared to Singapore, we're getting compared to the West and so forth.
Alex, let's pick up on a point that Roberto Manconi made earlier. And I thought, you know, he gave a fantastic presentation about this retail aggregation model. Like, do you see one day, let's say, the message and the factors coming from Dubai SME being propagated by a bank like National Bank of Abu Dhabi, for instance? Like, wouldn't they be a fantastic conduit for your message, for example?
Certainly. I mean, having worked with the SMEs in Singapore, at the Singapore banks, one of the key words that the banks use, the SME bankers use, that they are developing SMEs. So if you're an SME and you go to a Singapore bank and you wanted to set up an e-commerce business, the banks literally give you a package to say that these are the terms and conditions. You can set up an e-commerce business very easily. And the Singapore banks take a very proactive stance in helping the SMEs develop. If you want to open a factory in another country, the bankers are there with you. They have this, most of the banks have international finance schemes. Whereas in Dubai, a lot of our SMEs who wanted to go overseas had to, raise capital from different sources. I think the banks here do not necessarily follow them where they go. And that's the difference between a banker, SME banker in Singapore and SME banker in this region.
May I just...
Danish, of course, I was just going to come to you. Come on.
Fuel to the fire. I think SMEs are the Kim Kardashian of business in the Middle East at the moment. Everybody wants to be associated with them. You know, SMEs have existed for a very long time. Why is it that they are the flavor of the month for the last 3-5 years? Alex, you sit on the pinnacle of it, but in a good way. I do think that banks are probably one of the worst options for SMEs in the UAE. Having spent 33 years here, I think there are better options before you get to the banks. And I think that's where the education of the SME sector, perhaps, and I'm sure I'm going to cause some fury here, banks don't necessarily invest in the business. They invest in the opportunity. And I think what SMEs require is hand-holding through the growth process, which doesn't really exist here at the moment, or at least as clearly anyway.
Just before Kim leaps in there, isn't it the case, however, that any form of investor, angel investor, whatever, goes through precisely the same process as the bank, in that they're not necessarily concerned so much with your sector, they're concerned with your intent to meet your repayment obligation. So that they're concerned with evaluating your credit history and your character more than a particular sector and more than a stage of evolution within your business. What do you think, Kim?
I would say I don't particularly agree with what you said. I think if you take the case of National Bank of Abu Dhabi, we started already the journey. I think if you look at the commercial bank overall portfolio, the SME portfolio represents a large majority of our lending. So I think even for last year or so, we've even had more tailored solution depending on what kind of SME we're talking about. I mean, in the SME, you probably have the upper SME, a bit more sophisticated, more looking at cross-borders and looking at probably more trade finance of solution, a bit require more hand-holding and one-on-one discussions. That we have actually a team who would sit down and spend time with this, finance manager, understand their need. So that is something that we already have. For the lower end, I think we also have some which is called program lending, based more on a scorecard approach. It's also happening as well. So I think we have, within National Bank of Abu Dhabi, understood that for quite some time, and I think we are doing it. I understand probably the perception from the private sector is not there, but if you look at most of where the local bank, not only NNBAD in the UAE, are looking at the SME to really, see this as a growing portfolio of customers. And if you look at an SME, as you said, will be one of the large Fortune 500 in 2020.
Absolutely.
So if you look at the chain, we need to start to understand our customer and meet them now when they actually become larger. And I think later on this will be in more attractive customers. But the SME is an option. Financing through banking is an option today.
I look forward to it.
Something so we'll I've always... sorry to interrupt, Ken. Something, Aman, I've always wondered, with a business... an incubation and accelerator program such as Impact Hub provides, how do you train, in inverted commas, businesses to apply for finance? Like, do you do that bit? Do you help? Do you facilitate that process? How does that work? Tell us. I'm sure we're fascinated to know how a business, such a famous business, Impact Hub, how does it physically facilitate the gaining of investment? Tell us.
Well, talking to a banker who is not represented in the podium today, I was told that we get surprised by how often we get told how the financing works. At the end of the day, they say it's not rocket science. For companies or SMEs to become bankable, there are some sort of, basic guidelines, Absolutely. Governance, and so on. Yeah. So to your question about what does an incubator or a platform like Impact Hub does, we have structured activities and unstructured. There are some who want to kind of go forward in the sort of, cowboy style, and I think that's a process about that. And those who want some structure, you got investment-ready programs, sort of bankable-ready programs, and I think we do provide that process. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about intent. And, what is that SME bringing to the table, the startup bringing to the table? Do they want to be invested in? Do they want to be banked, for example? Are they looking for money for kind of growing? Are they looking for money for staying alive? I mean, what's the actual fundamental objective of that money that's coming to the table? Yeah.
Like, Naz, let's involve you in this because, you were an investment banker. You were a highly dynamic, successful investment banker in a previous life. What were the factors that you, as an investment specialist, analyzed in a business that qualified them or not for funding? What were you looking for?
I think primarily it was about the returns that the potential returns that would come through. And again, it all went down to the condition the market was, where they stand. It also came down to the fact that we actually used to look at the people who were running the business, the founders, their capability, their vision, and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, it boiled down to the financials, how the book looked like, where were they spending their money, what were they pretty much, what was their market, what market they were entering. So I think primarily it was more about that, but having said that, that's changing drastically.
Yes.
I meet entrepreneurs every single day, and they are more eager. I mean, I was sharing with you the experience where I had one of the entrepreneur wanting to set a business here in Dubai, rather where he originally came from, which was another part of GCC country. He was determined to start the business here in Dubai because he said, this is where the trend starts, which was quite weird because where we come from, it all comes from the Europe, it comes from US, which is quite eye-opening to see how the market has actually changed to where we are today.
Very interesting. What do you think, Alex, of that? Is that the way the world has changed? Does it begin with Dubai?
Yeah, I mean, we work with entrepreneurs every day and we see them. I always tell the entrepreneur that they come to me is build your story as if you want to be invested by somebody else or be highly bankable. I always tell the entrepreneurs to look, have a vision to sell the company in a few years' time. I mean, it's always best to be offered than to offer. So build your company, and the first thing we always tell SMEs is that your company story is your financial story. When someone asks you, how's your business? Indirectly, they're asking you, how's the financials of your company? Yeah. So build it first on day one. Even if you're an entrepreneur, and I think Avi mentioned that entrepreneurship and corporate governance, we need to find that sweet spot. It's that do simple things. As an entrepreneur, make sure you know your cash flow well. Make sure you record your invoices, because that's the start of corporate governance. And Dubai SME has a corporate governance program where we say that even if you're a startup, please observe the basics of how you record your daily cash flows in a transparent way. And early habits would then become a great profit in later years.
And I believe, Kim, I know you're a stickler for detail on this, so you're dying to
leap in.
No,
I think to your point, it's a fair point. I think I've seen a lot of SME being very successful at talking to bankers today. And sometimes they already have a pack ready with financial presentation of their business, their vision. So I think we need financial, we need data, but I think that's the way you present it to a banker or an investor. And I think I've seen SME already having experience with banker, already have it ready. And this gain a lot of time also for the assessment on banking side. Yeah. And I do like this company already that have something ready on the table that can be shared quickly to, for looking at financing options.
And do you regard that as a hallmark of the company's professionalism? Like, presumably, if the company doesn't do that, the converse is true, that you believe that they're not taking themselves seriously.
It's just a perception, again. I mean, I'm not saying someone who doesn't have a presentation is not a good business, but I think it's just a perception. Yeah. So in a time where bankers have a lot of liquidity, I don't have a lot of time, to make that time, worth, spending the time on your file, it's better to have it ready.
Good point. Danish, what do you think?
I think this signals what really is a defining trend of the moment. I think it's unfair, on the flip side of having attacked you, I'm sorry, is that banks shouldn't have to take all the risk themselves. Yeah. Right? Wouldn't you agree with me? I mean, you're the only ones taking the risk if you're the principal finance pool for SMEs. I do think that private sector collaboration, which is where people like yourselves or the private sort of equity fund that we run, we have to participate and invest and take the risk alongside the banks, but has to work in tandem. And I think that's really where the literacy side comes in. The banks do not have the time or the bandwidth to teach how to set up for fundraising, whereas the private sector could offer this quite nicely. And Impact Hub is a great example of that. Yeah.
And in fact, you know what, Danish? Like in the next 2 days, we're going to hear from Dairina Kolarova, Peter Linsenbold, and Roberto Parafioriti, who will all echo the point that you've made, that actually it's a collaborative effort that leverages SME success. We can't expect any one component to be the source of that success. Agreed. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for a fantastic panel session. Please, ladies and gentlemen. We will now take a short break for coffee and networking. If I can ask you all to be back for 12 noon, please. Thank you all so much.